Sleep deprivation and obstructive sleep apnea are the commonest causes of being sleepy in the day, that is hypersomnolence. And of course there are a whole lot of other conditions, taking sedative drugs, some systemic disorders, metabolic syndromes, endocrine syndromes, the whole lot of issues why one feels sleepy in the day. But if you look at a primary central nervous system disorder, which is affecting the neural control of the sleep-wake cycle and producing a dissociated sleep-wake state, and that is narcolepsy. So we're talking about primarily the primary CNS disorder which is affecting the neural control of sleep-wake cycle, and that is narcolepsy, which is the primary cause of hypersomnolence, or the prototypic disorder causing hypersomnolence, which is a primary CNS disorder. Now, this is just an introductory slide which sort of synopsis that this causes daytime sleepiness. There are a whole lot of clinical cardinal features which we will be describing, and there are certain pathophysiological mechanisms where we have advanced in our understanding, and we are looking at a neurotransmitter dysfunction, problem in its sensitivity, maybe some kind of abnormal modulation of the immune system, and a whole lot of genetic bearing in this disorder. And it isn't all that uncommon. It is seen in 0.9% prevalence and a definitive genetic predisposition, because it is seen that certain HLA haplotypes, I'll come to that when we talk of genetic predisposition, but there are some very common HLA haplotypes, HLA-DR15 and DQ6, which in general is seen in just 30% of population, is seen invariably in these patients with narcolepsy. And if you take siblings of patients with narcolepsy, they have a 60-fold elevated risk of developing narcolepsy at some point of time. And the spectrum of age where it can happen or discovered is huge, something like childhood to 72 years of age, but predominantly in young age. So the first peak is happening in the teens, and the second peak in somewhere in early 30s, and a little male preponderance. There have been certain milestones in the research, and it is, as I said, the last one is the discovery of hypocretin or orexin, but it is evolved over a period of so many years. The cardinal signs and symptoms of this disorder of narcolepsy, the first is excessive daytime somnolence, that is feeling sleepy in the day, cataplexy, hypnagogic hallucinations, and sleep paralysis. Now, the excessive daytime somnolence, cataplexy, they're all seen, but you see that EDS, or excessive daytime somnolence, is universal. It has to be there in a patient with narcolepsy, whereas others are seen in lesser percentages. So you can have a person without the others and just have EDS as well. And the other sleep disorders which are frequently found concomitant with this syndrome is OSA, the periodic leg movement syndrome, which is sleep-related movement disorders, REM behavior disorder, which is a parasomnia, and fragmented sleep. Now, what is excessive daytime somnolence? Now, this is this unwanted, unanticipated, and irrepressible sleep interludes, which may be just for a few minutes or few seconds. So, jhabki lag jati hai. So there is, and this happens when there is decreased environmental stimulation. Say, for example, now you're sitting in a meeting, you are bored, stiff, therefore you fall asleep. So whenever there is a decreased environmental stimulation, which can be in the form of a long drive, there could be as reading a very boring book, or looking at the television, or a conversation which is totally unstimulating, you fall asleep. And this could be natural, but when it happens very frequently, and sometimes it is extremely dangerous, say for example when you're driving, it would lead to accidents. So at that period of time, if the person just stops and takes a cat nap for even 10 minutes or half an hour, it's very refreshing. But it is transient, because these interludes keep happening. So in total, there is a whole lot of somnolence. So what happens? There is decreased concentration, and when we ask questions, you don't know what to ask because you haven't paid any attention, because you were feeling sleepy. So there is decreased attention, there is decreased concentration, so there is an apparent decreased cognition, which is apparent, which is not because you don't have any problem in memory, is because you haven't paid attention. So therefore there is a problem in performance. The performance scales go down in school children and in students, and there are there is an impairment which is happening in both professional as well as personal field. So there is a problem in quality of daily living. So this is what happens with excessive daytime somnolence. So again, there are the common causes of why one feels sleepy is not narcolepsy. It could be chronic behavioral problems, because most of the youngsters now are all owls. You know, we are either owls or we are what are called those things, larks. Yes, the larks are the ones which early to rise and early to bed. Owls they are awake in the day and they sleep in the they are awake in the night and sleep in the day. So this chronic behavioral things, you sleep through the day and then you study through the night, and of course sedative mechanisms, the medications, obstructive sleep apnea, the mood disorders, the depression. But when you're talking of a primary CNS disorder, we're talking of narcolepsy. Now cataplexy is seen in 65 to 70% of patients with this syndrome of narcolepsy. Now what exactly is this? There is a sudden loss of muscle tone which happens whenever there is a very severe and sudden emotion. It could be anger, it could be laughter, it could be excitement, it could be anything which is a surprise. So it is sudden, it is severe emotion, there's a decrease in muscle tone. So someone who is exposed to this emotion, they're very angry, and then they lose their muscle tone. So if it is generalized, they just flop down. And if it is focal, it may not be generalized all the time. So if there is focal, there could be slurring of speech, or there could be a little facial sagging. There could be drop of a thing from a hand. So it would resemble something like a focal seizure, or it could be something like a focal transient ischemic events, which do form a differential of this focal cataplectic syndrome. So they're triggered by emotions, and in these, the respiratory movements, the extraocular movements, and there is no loss of consciousness. So these are all preserved. So there's a loss of muscle tone. So there's about 30% of individuals who will not have cataplexy, narcolepsy syndromes. Sleep paralysis is seen in about 60%. Now this happens when a patient is sleeping, and it can happen when he wakes up and he just can't move. So he's conscious, his ocular movements are okay, he's breathing normally, but he just can't move. It is terrifying, and usually it happens once they awaken from an REM phase, or when they have a hallucination, or they have these dream sequences. So they remember them and they wake up and they can't move. So it's a very terrifying, it's a dreadful experience. So the cardinal features are that patient is unable to move on awakening. It's less commonly unable to move on falling asleep. Usually there is hallucination. The respiratory extraocular movements are spared, and paralysis occurs less frequently when he is in uncomfortable position. And it gets relieved whenever you give them any sort of stimuli. You call out to them, or you touch them, then this paralysis gets relieved. Hallucinations are seen in 15 to 50% of cases. Hypnagogic is as they are falling asleep, and hypnopompic as when they are awakening. And they are also very vivid, very frightening, usually, I don't know why, those dreams are never really nice. They always seem to be dreadful. And they may be accompanied by paralysis. And the other common features are the tendency to take short, refreshing naps during the day, trouble sleeping at the night, and nocturnal compulsive behavior and obesity. These could be there as associated features in a patient with narcolepsy. Now, when they happen in children, they're restless, and there's increased motor activity, obviously inattentiveness, so there's academic, the grades fall, wide range of motor disturbances at onset, hypotonia, or there could be hypertonia, and motor disturbance would be, it has to be resolved. It's a problem in these individuals. The burden of disease, Dr. Dutt also covered about that. Essentially, it's a loss of performance in your professional sphere, in your personal sphere. So there is decreased performance, workplace, school, there are interpersonal problems, relationships also get into dizzy, decreased social interactions, and prone to accidents, depression, anxiety because of all this, and decreased self-esteem. Says the spectrum will broaden as the duration of these complaints increase and they're not attended to. There's been a study which looked into this, and they did find that whatever we have described has been seen in these individuals. Now, how do you identify an individual who may have narcolepsy. Now, those who do have excessive daytime somnolence mean they're not taking any medications, they're not on sedatives, they're not obese, they don't seem to have any obstructive sleep apnea features. Now, you must be well aware of what those clinical features are. And onset is happening because, as I said, the first peak is in teens, so something is happening in adolescence and is affecting their functioning. The assessment, this Epworth sleepiness score has already been alluded to. It is a function of a simple clinical scale of understanding how much is a person sleepy in the day, in what kind of activities. So anything over 11 is taken as a significant sleepiness score. Sleep history, sleep diary, this is very important. Somebody who's sleeping at 2 in the morning, you can't get them to be, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 6 in the morning. It's not possible. So the sleep diary and also the familial. I told you, there's a genetic predisposition. You look into that, and also the age of onset. The DSM-5 criteria has these as parameters which are mandatory. You have episodes of irrepressible need to sleep at least 3 times a week for at least a period of 3 months. And you may have cataplexy, the hypocretin deficiency. Any level in the CSF hypocretin less than 110 picogram per ml is taken as a diagnostic feature. And on the polysomnography, that is a very important diagnostic, in fact, again, a mandatory exercise you need before you diagnose. I'll come to that a little later. There are several subtypes. The DSM-5 has also categorized narcolepsy as narcolepsy without cataplexy, with hypocretin deficiency, with cataplexy and without hypocretin deficiency, the autosomal dominant cerebellar ataxia, deafness and narcolepsy, the autosomal dominant narcolepsy, obesity and type 2 diabetes, and narcolepsy secondary to another medical condition. So the diagnosis will require polysomnogram with MSLT, that is multiple sleep latency test. What exactly is this doing? When a person is put to sleep, he has to sleep very quickly. That is, the sleep onset is less than 8 minutes. And as Professor Mohan Kumar so elegantly described in the first basic lecture on sleep, the first sleep is not REM. He's going from stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he goes to REM. Now here we have the onset with a REM phase. So sleep onset REMs, at least there should be 2 or more of such episodes when you conduct so many MSLT. So it may be happening in the first sleep latency test that you may do, or you may have to repeat this couple of times to be able to get this. And you can assess the CSF hypocretin level. As I said before, it should be less than 110. And you should not find a better explanation. That is, the patient is not taking a cocktail of drugs which will also cause this excessive daytime somnolence. So the polysomnogram, the MSLT is this, as I have explained. There could be false negative results when they are taking certain medications. So a medication history and a sleep diary is absolutely essential. You should look at a mood disorder, someone who has a post-stress disorder, or you have other sleep deprivation problems, you will need to see. That's why you may require to do multiple MSLTs. So the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for narcolepsy, as I said before, this is the mandatory thing, and presence of at least one other thing, that is either A or B, where you have evidence of other cardinal features, cataplexy, hallucinations, and sleep paralysis, and the CSF low hypocretin and the PSG. There are some proposed newer definitions of narcolepsy where they said that EDS for at least 3 months and one of the following: definite cataplexy in positive MSLT result, and if narcolepsy type 1 is strongly suspected clinically but MSLT criteria are not met, repeat the MSLT, and you have either this low or less than 1/3 of normal. And in type 2 without cataplexy, you have EDS for at least 3 months, cataplexy is absent, positive MSLT, and you will have a normal orexin level in the CSF. The differential diagnosis: behavioral and circadian disturbance in adolescence. Again, coming back to sleep history and keeping a sleep diary, the medication history, and we have this whole lot of sleep and seizure problems which definitely need a differential, and in that PSG will be of great help. Now, the pathophysiological mechanisms have been proposed, host of them. There could be genetic predisposition, as I said, the neurotransmitter problems and abnormal immune modulation. We do have animal models. The first of this is the canine cataplexy model. This is the picture of these canines. These dogs are all in cataplexy. And these are the murine models of narcolepsy. They're all sleeping and these are all in this cataplexy. So they have seen that in the canine cataplexy model, when there is a muscarinic cholinergic stimulation, the cataplexy would enhance. And you block that cholinergic transmission, they'll all improve. And they feel that the nicotinic stimulation does nothing. So there is a neurotransmitter problem there, which is a form of increased sensitivity, and there is some kind of a dysregulation. The neuroanatomic sites for cataplexy is pons, but there is also a secondary site which is mesocorticolimbic dopaminergic system. Why? Because you do have this, that whenever there is an increased emotion, there is decreased muscle tone and there is cataplexy. So a secondary site has also been implicated. And as regards abnormal immune modulation, what they found is, this is very recent in 2010, when they had this vaccination given to Finnish and Scandinavian children for H1N1 infection, and this was a vaccine with using a very potent ASO3 adjuvant, and they found that the prevalence of narcolepsy increased by 8 to 12 times in that population. And when they did HLA typing, they found that there was HLA DQB0602 allele association in these children. So they then postulated that probably there is also abnormal immune modulation which may be implicated as one of the hypotheses for the occurrence of narcolepsy. Now there is definitely REM sleep which is distinctly related with the dysfunction and inappropriate regulation. The REM sleep, the center response, you have what are called as REM on cells which fire when the REM is on, and then you have REM off cells. The REM on cells are cholinergic and these are noradrenergic, so they're monoaminergic, and they said that maybe it's defective monoamine dependent inhibition of REM on cells which may result in narcolepsy. And then this is this recent discovery of hypocretin in the CSF, because this is said to, they have found that there are decreased number of hypocretin neurons in the murine models of narcolepsy. And they feel that there is these neurons are auto-excitatory and they project on to the lateral hypothalamus, and they help in maintaining the wakefulness of the animal. So the absence of hypocretin peptide and signal is seen in the CSF and hypothalamus of narcoleptic patients as well. In a narcoleptic, you don't find much of these dots which are there in a normal person. Histamine is another neurotransmitter which is supposed to maintain wakefulness. It is also low in the CSF in patients in narcolepsy. And it can be also seen in those individuals where hypocretin is normal. You see, I've told you, narcolepsy without cataplexy, they may not have hypocretin which is low in CSF. In such individuals, histamine is still low. But histamine is not low in patients who have excessive daytime somnolence because of obstructive sleep apnea. So therefore, histamine is now being taken as a biomarker in those patients who have an EDS because of a central problem and not because of a peripheral obstruction. The other CNS nuclei for maintaining wakefulness, you have locus coeruleus which is giving norepinephrine, we have raphe nucleus which is producing serotonin, we have the tubomammillary nucleus which is producing histamine, the ventral tegmental area which is dopamine, and basal forebrain which is producing acetylcholine. Say in these, they say that the hypocretin neurons which are auto-excitatory, they're all projecting from the lateral hypothalamus, they're projecting to all these nuclei and maintaining wakefulness. And very recently they've also found that there's an autoantigen tribbles homologue 2 which probably is destroying the hypocretin producing neurons. So something like an autoimmunity. And this discovery has triggered certain trials with immunoglobulins, and they have tried giving IVIG in patients with narcolepsy when they discovered, with some resolution of excessive daytime somnolence which was temporary. So this is all at the most, I must say, in phase 2. Now, coming back to the genetic factors, there's a 40% increased risk in the first degree relatives who have narcolepsy to develop narcolepsy. As I said before, a whole lot of them carry this HLA-DR15 and HLA-DQ gene. Siblings have a 64 elevated risk, and it's also seen to be associated with HLA-DQ the 10102 and DQ. There's a whole lot of HLA haplotypes which have been identified with this syndrome. The genome-wide association studies have also seen protective variants which protect against narcolepsy, and they found association between the SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphism, the T cell receptor of alpha locus and narcolepsy. And there is the genome-wide association study in 202 candidate genes in 222 patients, and they found these 6 genes, which these numbers probably don't make much relevance to us. It is just to drive home the point that yes, there seems to be a definite genetic predisposition to this syndrome. And the management is both non-pharmacologic as well as pharmacologic. Sleep hygiene, you can't reiterate how more important it can be, definitely there, and that you need to have regular sleep schedules, and don't try to cram up everything in the last minute because sleep is not something that you can bypass or that you can compromise upon. That seems to be one of those things, okay, I can stay up in the night and I can do this thing. That probably you should get out of that habit. And in the pharmacological treatment, Professor Sharma had already covered that. We have the seen as stimulants in the form of methylphenidate, modafinil, dextroamphetamine, methamphetamine, amphetamine. These are also habit-producing drugs, so they're not over-the-counter drugs. There are special prescriptions which are needed for these drugs. And for cataplexy, you have sodium oxybate, tricyclic antidepressants, SSRIs, but we need to be careful about these because these are again acting upon the REM sleep, so they may sometimes exacerbate other sleep disorders. But most commonly used are in fact modafinil, which is a relative of modafinil, and they do have side effects. They can have headaches, they can have gastrointestinal complaints, they can cause dizziness. So it is not that just to stay awake, let's take these drugs and let's stay awake in the night and study. That should not be the take-home message. These are important drugs and don't play around with it. So summary and key messages. Untreated excessive daytime sleepiness is dangerous to self, dangerous to others. Narcolepsy is always a consideration in the adolescent and adult with unexplained EDS, so daytime sleepiness. It's a diagnosis with a common presentation and a very clear diagnostic criteria. So not everybody who's falling asleep in the day is having this disorder. Over the past few decades, we've had advances in our understanding of pathophysiology. Most important has been the discovery of hypocretin deficiency. And we don't have pathophysiology-based treatments because we don't have level 1 evidence anywhere near that with IVIG or other immune modulation. Yes, symptomatically we can benefit by non-pharmacological assessment as well as certain CNS stimulants. The etiology is probably still nebulous. Narcolepsy is a disorder of sleep-wake the state, and the instability appears to be related to injury or dysfunction, the hypocretin mediated signaling, and the spectrum of patient-related symptoms is pretty broad. You could have even patients without the other cardinal features like cataplexy, the hallucinations or sleep paralysis. Thank you.